Imagine discovering that something you do almost every single week in your own kitchen, something you believe is practical, responsible, even smart, could quietly be setting the stage for one of the deadliest diseases known to modern medicine. Not smoking, not drinking, not some rare genetic condition, just reheating your leftovers. Think about it for a moment. Last night's dinner, the fries you saved because you didn't want to waste food, the chicken you wrapped carefully and put in the fridge, the rice you planned to finish the next day. You did what millions of people do every day. You were being efficient, you were saving money, you were avoiding waste. And then today, you reheated it. What if I told you that in that exact moment, the second heat touches that food, a completely different chemical process begins? One that your body was never designed to handle repeatedly. One that, over time, can quietly damage your cells, disrupt your biological systems, and create the perfect internal environment for something far more dangerous than you ever imagined. Does that sound extreme? It should. Because this isn't a rare behavior, this is a global habit. Hundreds of millions of people reheat leftovers every week without a second thought. It feels harmless, it feels normal, it feels safe. But what if it isn't? What if the food you trust, the food sitting in your refrigerator right now, is not the same food the second time you heat it? What if it is transformed into something your body recognizes not as nourishment but as a threat? Here is the part that makes this even more unsettling. Your pancreas, one of the most important organs in your body, does not warn you when it is being damaged. There is no pain, no swelling, no early signal telling you something is wrong. The damage builds silently, slowly, over months and years of everyday habits that seem completely harmless on the surface. By the time symptoms appear, in many cases, it is already too late. Pancreatic cancer is one of the most aggressive and least survivable cancers in the world. The 5-year survival rate is shockingly low, and that is exactly why what you are about to learn matters so much. Because at least one, and very likely more, of the foods we are about to discuss is sitting in your fridge right now, waiting to be reheated tonight. This is not about fear. This is about awareness. In the next few minutes, you will discover 5 specific foods that become significantly more dangerous when reheated, what actually happens to them at a chemical level, and why those changes can place an unexpected burden on your body, especially your pancreas. Once you understand this, you will never look at leftovers the same way again. Before we go any further, you need to understand why this matters so much. The pancreas is one of the most silent organs in your entire body. When it is under stress, when it is inflamed, even when it is slowly being damaged day after day, it does not send clear warning signals. There is no sharp pain to alert you, no obvious swelling, no early symptom that forces you to stop and pay attention. Everything happens quietly. And that silence is exactly what makes pancreatic cancer so dangerous. Because by the time something finally feels wrong, a vague discomfort in your upper abdomen, an unusual fatigue after meals, a subtle loss of appetite, or unexplained weight loss, the disease has often already progressed far beyond the early stages. In many cases, it has already spread. That is why pancreatic cancer is known as one of the most aggressive cancers in modern medicine. The survival statistics are not just concerning, they are alarming. The 5-year survival rate remains in the low double digits. That means the vast majority of people diagnosed with this disease do not survive beyond a few years. Not because medicine has failed, but because the disease is usually discovered too late to be effectively treated. And here is the part that should make you pause. This is not something that happens suddenly overnight. It is not a single event or one bad decision. It is often the result of long-term, repeated stress on the body, small, seemingly harmless habits that accumulate over time. Your pancreas works every single day without rest. It regulates blood sugar, produces digestive enzymes, and maintains a delicate internal balance that your entire body depends on. But when it is constantly exposed to inflammatory compounds, toxic byproducts, or metabolic stress, it begins to lose that balance. Slowly, silently, without asking for attention, until one day it can no longer keep up. This is why awareness is critical, because the earlier you understand the risks, the more power you have to change the outcome before it ever reaches that point. Let's begin with the first food, and for many people, this is going to be the most surprising one. Fried food. Think about it. The crispy fries you saved from last night, the fried chicken you wrapped carefully and placed in the fridge because it felt wasteful to throw it away. The spring rolls, the nuggets, the golden crunchy leftovers that still look perfectly fine the next day. You take them out, reheat them, maybe even add a little oil to bring back that crispy texture. And right there, in that moment, something changes. What most people don't realize is that cooking oils, especially common ones like sunflower oil, corn oil, and soybean oil, are highly unstable under repeated heat. The first time you cook with them, they already begin to break down, but when you heat them again, the process becomes far more aggressive. This is called oxidative degradation. During this process, the oil begins to form a group of toxic compounds known as aldehydes. At the same time, large amounts of free radicals are released, unstable molecules that behave like tiny sparks inside your body. These free radicals don't just float around harmlessly, they collide with your cells, damaging their structure and, more importantly, their DNA. Your DNA is the instruction manual that tells each cell how to function, when to grow, when to repair, and when to stop. When that instruction system becomes damaged repeatedly, cells begin to behave abnormally. They grow when they shouldn't. They stop responding to control signals. And that is one of the earliest steps in the development of cancer. Here is where your pancreas becomes especially vulnerable. Unlike some other organs, the pancreas is highly sensitive to oxidative stress. When you consume food that contains these oxidized compounds, your body triggers an inflammatory response to try to neutralize the damage. But if this happens frequently multiple times a week, over months and years, that inflammation never fully shuts off. It becomes chronic. And a chronically inflamed pancreas is not functioning in a normal environment. It is working under constant stress, constantly trying to repair damage, while continuing to perform its essential roles in digestion and blood sugar regulation. Over time, that balance begins to break down. What makes this particularly dangerous is how ordinary the habit feels. Reheating fries, reheating fried chicken. These are not extreme behaviors. They are part of everyday life in millions of households. But repeated exposure to oxidized oils and aldehydes creates a biological environment your body was never designed to handle long-term. And the damage does not happen all at once. It builds quietly, one reheated meal at a time. Now let's move to the second food, and this one is perhaps the most unexpected of all. Leafy green vegetables. Spinach, kale, mustard greens, arugula, these are foods that most people associate with health, vitality, and disease prevention. They are rich in nutrients, widely recommended, and often considered essential for a balanced diet. And that is exactly why this hidden detail is so important. In their fresh state, leafy greens contain natural compounds called nitrates. On their own, nitrates are not harmful. In fact, under normal conditions, they can even support certain bodily functions. But once these vegetables are cooked and then stored, a transformation begins. Bacteria naturally present in the food start converting nitrates into nitrites. This process happens quietly while the food sits, especially when it is stored for later use. Then comes the second heating. When you reheat these vegetables, those nitrites react with amino acids present in the food. This reaction leads to the formation of compounds known as nitrosamines. And this is where concern begins. Nitrosamines have been classified by the World Health Organization through the International Agency for Research on Cancer as probable human carcinogens. In simple terms, this means they are strongly associated with an increased risk of cancer over time. But what makes them particularly dangerous is how they interact with your body. They are genotoxic, meaning they can directly affect your DNA. Your DNA acts as the control system for every cell in your body. It determines how cells grow, repair, and function. When compounds like nitrosamines interfere with that system, small errors can occur. At first, your body repairs many of these errors, but not all. And when exposure happens repeatedly, meal after meal, those small changes can begin to accumulate. Over time, this can disrupt normal cellular behavior and increase long-term risk. Now consider how common this habit is. Cooking a large batch of spinach or greens, storing it in the fridge, and reheating it the next day feels efficient and healthy. The appearance, smell, and taste remain almost unchanged. But the chemistry is not the same, and your body responds to that difference even if you are not aware of it. This does not mean leafy greens are unhealthy. It means the way they are handled after cooking matters more than most people realize. Now we move to the third food on this list, and this one may be the most shocking of all, not because it looks dangerous, but because it looks completely harmless. Rice. Plain, simple, neutral, no strong smell, no obvious warning signs. It is one of the most widely consumed foods in the world, eaten in millions of homes every single day. And that is exactly why this matters. Think about your own routine. You cook a large pot of rice, store it in the refrigerator, and reheat portions over the next day or two. It feels efficient. It feels normal. In fact, it is one of the most common habits in modern kitchens. But what most people don't realize is that the moment cooked rice begins to cool, a biological process can quietly begin. Rice often contains a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. This organism is commonly present in raw rice and is not something you can see, smell, or taste. When you cook rice, the active bacteria are destroyed, but not their spores. Spores are highly resistant survival structures. They are designed to withstand extreme conditions, including heat. So, even after cooking, these spores can remain alive inside the rice. Now here is where timing becomes critical. As the rice cools and sits at room temperature, those spores can begin to activate. They wake up, multiply, and start producing toxins. And this is the key point. Some of these toxins are heat stable. That means when you reheat the rice later, even thoroughly, you may kill the bacteria, but the toxins they already produced are still there. They are not destroyed by normal reheating methods, including microwaving. So, what you are eating is no longer just rice. It is rice that may contain biologically active toxins. These toxins can irritate your digestive system, sometimes causing symptoms like nausea, abdominal discomfort, or diarrhea. But even when symptoms are mild or barely noticeable, something deeper can be happening. Repeated exposure to these toxins can contribute to low-grade inflammation in the gut. And your gut is not isolated from the rest of your body. There is a well-established connection between the digestive system and the pancreas, often referred to as the gut-pancreas axis. They share blood flow, signaling pathways, and inflammatory responses. So, when the gut is repeatedly irritated or inflamed, those signals can extend beyond the intestines. They reach the pancreas. Over time, this creates an environment of chronic stress not from a single event, but from repeated, low-level exposure that builds gradually. This is what makes it dangerous. Not a single meal, not one mistake, but a pattern, a habit. Reheating rice that has been stored improperly, left too long, or cooled too slowly. And because there are no obvious signs, no smell, no taste, no visible change, most people never question it. They continue the habit, unaware that each time they may be introducing compounds into their body that contribute to long-term inflammation and stress on vital organs, especially one that never speaks up until it is already overwhelmed. Now let's move to the fourth food, and this one is something almost every household eats regularly. Chicken. It seems simple and safe. You cook it thoroughly the first time, making sure it's fully done. Then, you store the leftovers in the refrigerator and reheat them the next day, usually in a microwave. It feels completely normal. But this is where a hidden problem begins. Microwaves do not heat food evenly. Unlike an oven, which surrounds food with consistent heat, a microwave works by exciting water molecules inside the food. Because different parts of chicken contain varying amounts of water, fat, and density, some areas heat faster than others. This creates what are known as cold spots. These are sections inside the food that remain at lower temperatures, even when the outside feels hot. And these cold spots can become a serious concern. Chicken is commonly associated with bacteria such as Salmonella and Campylobacter, proper cooking the first time usually eliminates these bacteria. However, contamination can still occur afterward through handling, storage, or surfaces. When reheating is uneven, those bacteria may survive in the colder areas of the food. And here's the problem: you cannot detect this with your senses. The surface may feel hot enough, giving you the impression that the entire piece is safe, while inside, certain areas remain at temperatures where bacteria can persist. This creates a false sense of safety. Now, not every exposure leads to immediate illness. Severe food poisoning is obvious fever, cramps, and digestive distress. But there is another layer that is often overlooked: repeated low-level exposure. Small amounts of bacteria or their byproducts may not cause dramatic symptoms, but they can still trigger mild inflammatory responses in your body. When this happens, occasionally, your body can handle it. But when it happens repeatedly, that inflammation can become more persistent. And chronic inflammation is not harmless. It places ongoing stress on your digestive system and can extend its effects to other organs, including the pancreas. Over time, this continuous low-grade stress makes it harder for your body to maintain balance. This is what makes the habit risky: not a single reheated meal, but the repeated pattern of uneven heating, hidden cold spots, and silent exposure over time. Because sometimes, the danger is not what you can see or taste, it is what remains inside, unnoticed. Now we come to the fifth and final food, and this one carries a unique combination of risks that many people never consider. Potatoes. They seem simple, comforting, and completely harmless. Roasted potatoes, baked wedges, crispy fries, these are foods people often cook in large batches and save for later. Reheating them feels practical, even efficient. But what happens inside a potato after it has been cooked, cooled, and then reheated is far more complex than it appears. There are two key processes at play. The first involves a compound called acrylamide. Acrylamide forms when starchy foods like potatoes are exposed to high temperatures, especially during frying or roasting. That golden brown surface, the crispy texture many people enjoy, is a result of chemical reactions occurring during cooking. And acrylamide is part of that reaction. It has been classified by international health organizations as a probable carcinogen, meaning it is linked to an increased risk of cancer when exposure occurs repeatedly over time. Here is what makes reheated potatoes more concerning. When potatoes are cooked and then refrigerated, their surface changes, moisture decreases, and sugars become more concentrated. When you reheat them at high temperatures, especially in a pan or oven, the conditions for acrylamide formation become even more favorable. In other words, the second heating can intensify the production of this compound. That is the first layer of concern. The second involves something called resistant starch. When potatoes cool after cooking, part of their starch transforms into resistant starch, a form that is digested more slowly. This helps regulate blood sugar levels and supports a more stable metabolic response. But when you reheat those potatoes, especially at high heat, that resistant starch is largely converted back into regular starch. And this changes how your body reacts. Instead of a gradual release of glucose, you get a faster spike in blood sugar, and every spike requires your pancreas to respond by producing insulin. Occasionally, this is normal. But when it happens repeatedly multiple times a week, over long periods, it places increasing demand on the pancreas. The cells responsible for insulin production are pushed into frequent, high-output responses. Over time, this can lead to reduced efficiency and greater metabolic strain. So with reheated potatoes, you are dealing with two simultaneous pressures: chemical exposure from compounds like acrylamide and metabolic stress from repeated blood sugar spikes. Individually, each may seem minor, but together, repeated over time, they create a pattern your body must continuously adapt to. And like everything we've discussed, it's not a single meal that matters most. It's the habit. Now that we have gone through all 5 foods, it is important to step back and understand the bigger picture. Because the real danger is not any single meal. It is the underlying pattern, the biological impact that builds over time. At the core of everything we discussed are three interconnected mechanisms: chronic inflammation, DNA damage, and sustained pressure on the pancreas. Let's start with inflammation. Inflammation is your body's natural defense system. When something harmful enters your system, your body responds by activating immune pathways to contain and repair the damage. In small, controlled amounts, this is beneficial. But when exposure becomes frequent, reheated oils, bacterial toxins, chemical byproducts that inflammatory response does not fully shut off, it becomes chronic. And chronic inflammation is not a neutral state. It creates a constant background of stress inside your body, affecting tissues, disrupting normal function, and making cells more vulnerable over time. Now, layer on top of that the second mechanism, DNA damage. Compounds like aldehydes, nitrosamines, and acrylamide do not just irritate tissues, they interact directly with your cells at a molecular level. They can interfere with the integrity of your DNA, the system that controls how cells grow, repair, and function. When DNA is repeatedly exposed to these compounds, small errors begin to accumulate. Most are repaired, but not all. And over time, these accumulated errors can alter normal cellular behavior, increasing the risk of abnormal growth. Finally, consider the role of the pancreas. This organ is constantly working behind the scenes, regulating blood sugar, producing enzymes, maintaining balance. But it is highly sensitive to both inflammation and metabolic stress. Every time your body faces repeated spikes in blood sugar or ongoing inflammatory signals from the gut, the pancreas is forced to respond continuously, without rest. Over time, this creates sustained pressure not from one major event, but from countless small demands that slowly erode its resilience. And this is the key point. None of these mechanisms act in isolation. They overlap. They reinforce each other. And when they persist together over long periods, they create an internal environment where normal balance becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Not suddenly, but gradually, quietly, until the body can no longer compensate. Now that you understand the risks, the most important question becomes, what can you actually do about it? The goal here is not to create fear or force you to completely change the way you eat overnight. It is to make small, practical adjustments that reduce unnecessary stress on your body, especially over the long term. Let's start with how you reheat food. For fried foods, avoid reheating them in oil. Adding fresh oil or reusing old oil exposes the food to another cycle of oxidative damage. Instead, use dry heat. An oven or an air fryer at a moderate temperature can restore texture without introducing additional harmful compounds. When it comes to leafy greens, the simplest approach is often the safest. Try to cook only what you plan to eat in one sitting. If you do have leftovers, consider eating them cold in a salad, a wrap, or a mixed dish. This avoids the chemical changes that occur during a second round of heating. For rice, timing and storage are critical. After cooking, allow it to cool quickly rather than leaving it at room temperature for long periods. Store it in the refrigerator within an hour, and ideally consume it within 24 hours. When reheating, make sure it is heated thoroughly and evenly, and avoid reheating it multiple times. With chicken, uniform heating is key. If possible, use an oven instead of a microwave to ensure that heat reaches every part of the food. If you do use a microwave, cut the chicken into smaller pieces, heat it evenly, and allow it to rest briefly after heating, or consider eating it cold in salads to eliminate the risk entirely. For potatoes, try to take advantage of their natural benefits after cooling. Cold potatoes retain resistant starch, which supports more stable blood sugar levels. If you prefer them warm, use gentle, low heat rather than high temperatures, and avoid refrying them altogether. Beyond these specific foods, the broader habit to focus on is awareness. Pay attention to how food is stored, how long it sits, and how often it is reheated. Avoid repeated heating cycles. Aim for freshness when possible. And remember that convenience should not come at the cost of long-term health. These are not extreme changes. They are small decisions repeated consistently. And over time, those decisions can reduce unnecessary strain on your body, support better balance, and help protect the systems that work silently for you every single day. At the end of the day, this is not about fear, it is about awareness. The foods we talked about are not inherently dangerous. They become a problem when small habits are repeated without understanding what is happening beneath the surface. Reheating leftovers may seem harmless, but over time, these patterns can quietly place stress on your body in ways you never intended. Your pancreas has been working for you every single day, without rest, without complaint. It regulates, protects, and supports your body in complete silence. The least we can do is be mindful of how our daily choices affect it. The good news is this: it is not too late. Every better decision you make from this moment forward matters. Every small adjustment, how you store food, how you reheat it, how often you repeat certain habits, moves you in the right direction. So tonight, when you open your refrigerator, pause for just a second. Think about what you learned and make one better choice. If this information helped you see something differently, share it with someone you care about, a parent, a partner, a friend, because sometimes the simplest knowledge can be the most powerful protection. Take care of your body. It is the only place you have to live.